eating in or dining out. Both are
Hey, we're good. What's up? Evening, guys. So, if you didn't get the message, we postponed our thing, me and Jin, to next week. So, this coming Saturday, going to have at it on Gurren Lagann. So, I'll be excited for that. It'll be all good. It just gives me more time to prepare. That was On Foot with Dimsval, which it's got a bunch of like dudes from other bands. It's like a super group kind of thing. There's guys from Bodum, Pravatas, Fintrolls, and Oceans, and Dispit. It's just like there's guys from like different bands. It sounds really good. I can really hear the Fintroll vibe in there, and I can kind of get a vibe for the Bodum. I don't know much about Pravatas, and certainly I do know And Oceans. I don't know Dispit, but I'm liking what I stumbled across picking songs for today. All right, so here we are. So this bad boy is about 14 pages, so I'm going to go about 4.5 pages, 5 pages, and then take a break. Let's get on with it. Florus and Agrippa II, or two. I don't know if this is like Florus and Agrippa, like the second time around. Like I think that's what it's supposed to mean. I don't know the family too well, but anyway. Oh, let's close that. The next procurator, Festus, tackled the chief curse of the country. He killed a considerable number of the bandits and captured many more. Albinus, who followed him, acted very differently, being guilty of every possible misdemeanor, not content with official actions that meant widespread robbery and looting of private property, or with taxes that crippled the whole nation. He allowed those imprisoned for banditry by local courts or his own predecessors to be bought out by their relatives, and only the man who failed to pay was left in jail to serve his sentence. We do that as regular business today, and it is a chief complaint about justice system corruption as well, while we simultaneously accept it. And we lived in this we're living, I don't know if we're still living in it because there's been a lot of reforms, but we have lived in that cognitive loop and state of the world of the prison Ouroboros, sucking the life force energy out of people that are mostly doing benign things. And I'm not saying that we don't have a whole lot of people that are beyond trust in our society that we do not care to either exile or execute. You can't just exile people anymore. Like, that's how illegal immigration happens. It's just like you kick somebody out of a country. That doesn't work. You can kick somebody out of a city, right? And then you've got like hundreds of other cities or large towns to choose from. You just have to get out of certain jurisdictions. You know, perhaps you're kicked out of a county because you pissed off a sheriff, right? And so there's a whole lot of people that are well below the need for somebody's vengeful execution that we just hold and waste money keeping them out of society. And what's really funny is that we forget that the U.S. Constitution exclusivized slavery for the criminal. It's the duly convicted clause of the 13th Amendment, where the only instance in which slavery is legal is under the federal penal system. And this is where black incarceration is established. And I don't know if there's a trend of behavior of Black America that this is about. I certainly know that they were setting up the conditions with Jim Crow to make it worse, right? Because why do you have a big system anyway, right? Why do you have all this kind of stuff, right? In the heathen kingdoms, we don't really do much with the concept of jail. We have way different punishments, and we have way less ordainments on the particularities of how you live your life. See how that works. See why it's not about anti-Semitism. It's about anti-values of control. Not to the Revolutionary Party in Jerusalem cast off all restraints, and its leaders bribed Albinus to shut his eyes to their subversive activities. Whilst any of the common people who did not care for peace and quiet joined forces with the procurator's associates, every scoundrel surrounded by his own gang stood out from his followers like a bandit chief or dictator and used his henchmen to rob respectable citizens. The result was that the victims kept their wrongs to themselves, while those still immune, through fear of the same fate, flattered those they should have battered. In short, free speech was completely suppressed and tyranny reigned everywhere. From then on, the seeds of the coming destruction were being sown in the city. Such a man was Albinus, but his successor, Gessius Florus, made him appear an angel by comparison. Albinus, for the most part, did his mischief with secrecy and dissimulation. Gessius boasted of the wrongs he did to the nation, and, as if sent as public executioner to punish condemned criminals, indulged in every kind of robbery and violence. Isn't that just always what you throw on the right-winger? I bet this guy was the right-winger. When pitiable things happened, he showed himself the most heartless of men. When disgraceful things, the most disgusting. No one ever had less use for truth or thought about more subtle methods of crime. Making a profit out of individuals he considered poor sport, he stripped whole cities, ruined complete communities, and virtually announced to the entire country that everyone might be a bandit if he chose, so long as he himself received a rake-off. The result of his avarice was that every district was denuded and many people left their old homes and fled to foreign provinces. So, yeah, like, here you can see he's kind of being a Nazi, right? This is you know, like, it's just like everybody causing trouble is now hereby guilty of banditry. Right? Everybody who is not following protocols is sick with COVID-19. right? Everybody who is homosexual is raping people. Or like it's these awful conclusions to human behavior, the ideas of pre-crime. This is like Stalinism here. As long as Cestius Gallus administered the province from his headquarters in Syria, no one dared even to inform against Florus. But when he appeared in Jerusalem on the eve of the Passover, the people crowded round, at least 3 million of them. That says 3 million. Let's check that annotation, shall we? It says Josephus has surpassed himself this time. That's the right one? Yeah, okay. He did? Would you care to elaborate? If this is an inflated number, you can't just give us the exact number right there. You bothered to just knock Josephus, but you withheld the truth from me? What's your angle, man? It's as much the translator's fault as it's his at that point. But I wanted to use the Penguin Publishing Classic for a reason. Because so many people know it. Right? Because everybody knows Penguin Publishing. So only the criticism that belongs to the Penguin Published Classic that this is acceptable, and I am commenting on what I see and read and hear in real time, to my sense of trivium. Imploring him to pity the nation in its distress and shouting. Hold on a second. Wait a minute. President. The ruins of their country. Florus was present. Wait. Oh my gosh. Imploring him to pity the nation in its distress and shouting against Florus. The ruin of their country. Florus, who was present and stood at Cestius's side, laughed at their protests. Cestius, however, quieted the excited crowd by assuring them that he would guarantee more reasonable conduct on Florus's part in the future. Then he returned to Antioch, but Florus accompanied him as far as Caesarea, disguising the intention he had already formed of making war on the nation, his only hope of diverting attention from his own crimes, for if peace lasted, he foresaw that he would have the Jews accusing him to Caesar. But if he contrived to make them revolt, the greater outrage would forestall any inquiry into lesser ones. So to ensure a nationwide revolt, he daily added to the general distress. Meanwhile, the Greeks of Caesarea secured from Nero control over the city and returned with the decision in writing. War broke out in the 12th year of Nero's reign and the 7th of Agrippa's in the month of May. In comparison with the fearful disaster to which it led, its pretext was insignificant. The Jews in Caesarea had a synagogue alongside a piece of ground belonging to a Greek citizen. This they had repeatedly tried to acquire, offering many times the real value. Scorning their requests, the Greek further insulted them by beginning to build a factory right up to the dividing line, leaving them a narrow and utterly inadequate passage. The immediate results was that the more hot-headed of the young men jumped in and interfered with the builders. When this display of force was suppressed by Florus, the leading Jews, among them John the tax collector, having no other way out, gave Florus a bribe of 8 silver talents to put a stop to the work. As nothing mattered to him but money, he promised full cooperation, but as soon as the money was his, he left Caesarea for Sebaste, allowing party strife to take its course as if he had sold the Jews permission to fight it out. The next day was a Sabbath, and when the Jews gathered in the synagogue of Caesarion, Partisan had placed a large earthen vessel upside down at the entrance and was sacrificing birds on it. Interesting. This infuriated the Jews, who felt that their law had been violated and the site desecrated. The steadier, gentler people advised an appeal to the authorities. The quarrelsome element and youthful hotheads burned for a fight. The Caesarian partisans stood waiting for them, for they had sent the men to sacrifice by prearrangement, and the clash soon came. Gedunctus, the cavalry officer detailed to prevent it, stepped forward, picked up the vessel, and attempted to end the strife. But he was no match for the violence of the Caesarians. So the Jews seized their law book and retired to Naarbeta, a Jewish area 7 miles from Caesarea. John and 12 other influential citizens followed Florus to Sebaste, where they complained bitterly of what had happened and implored him to help tactfully, reminding him of the 8 talents. He actually arrested these men and put them in prison on the ground that they had removed the law book from Caesarea. This new outrage caused anger in Jerusalem, but passions were still kept under control. Florus, however, as if he had contracted to fan the war into flame, sent to the treasury and removed 17 talents on the pretext that Caesar require it, upon following at once, and the people rushed in a body into the temple, where with piercing yells they called on the name of Caesar, imploring him to free them from Florus' misrule. Some of the rioters shouted the most scandalous abuse at the latter, and going round with a hat begged coppers for the poor. It says starveling. I guess they meant starving. This did not cure his avarice, but increased his determination to get rich quick. So instead of going to Caesarea to extinguish the conflagration that was breaking out there and to remove the causes of the trouble, as he had been paid to do, he dashed off to Jerusalem with an army of horse and foot, in order that by Roman arms he might get what he wanted and by intimidation skin the city. The people, anxious to make him ashamed of his attempt, met the soldiers with friendly greetings and prepared to receive Florus submissively. He, however, sent ahead 50 horsemen commanded by Capito, and ordered them to retire and not to mock with new-found cordiality the man they had abused so scandalously. If they were fearless and outspoken, they ought to make fun of him to his face and show by force of arms as well as words that they loved liberty. This took the crowd aback, and when Capito's troops charged into their midst, they scattered before they could salute Florus or convince the soldiers of their readiness to obey. Returning to their homes, they passed the night in fear and dejection. Florus slept in the palace, and the next day had a dais erected outside and took his seat. The chief priests, political leaders, and eminent citizens lined up before this tribunal. Florus ordered them to give up the men who had abused him, declaring that they themselves would feel the weight of his hand if the culprits were not forthcoming. The Jewish leaders insisted that the people were peacefully disposed and apologized for the offending remarks. In such a mass of people, there were bound to be some impudent juveniles, and it was impossible to identify the miscreants when everyone was conscience-stricken and afraid to confess his guilt if the procurator cared anything about the peaceful state of the nation and wished to save the city for the Romans, it would be better for the sake of the many innocent to pardon the few guilty than because of a few scamps to wreck the lives of so many loyal subjects. This plea made Florus still more furious, and he shouted to the soldiers to sack the upper marketplace and kill all they met. Their acquisitiveness, thus stimulated by their general encouragement, they not only sacked the area to which they had been sent, but burst into all the houses and murdered the occupants. Go figure. There followed a flight through the narrow streets, slaughter of those who were caught, and rapine in all its horror. Many peaceful citizens were seized and taken before Florus, who had them scourged and then crucified. Oh, crucified them. Ow! The total number that perished that day, including women and children, for not even infants were spared, came to about 3,600. It's really amazing when you're when you've got so many freaking violence going on a level where, you know, you're following the order against the very young in this manner, right? Which is done, which is done because you don't want those children swearing revenge on you. It's just a reality. You've killed their parents. You hardly need any of them, because you just want to get the adults who have less of a reason to venge against you and are most immediately useful as an indentured servant of some sort. Yeah, that's just the way it went down if you're doing this kind of thing, right? And you have to assume that your enemy thinks that way, because you're being a fool otherwise. The disaster was made the more crushing by the unheard of character of the Roman brutality. No one had ever before dared to do what Florus did then, to scourge men of equestrian rank before the judgment seat and nail them to the cross, men who were indeed Jews but yet enjoyed Roman status. Interesting. So, kind of like a dual citizen issue, if you will. At this time, it happened that King Agrippa had traveled to Alexandria to congratulate Alexander, who had been entrusted with Egypt by Nero and sent there as governor. However, his sister Bernice was in Jerusalem, and seeing the criminal conduct of the soldiers, she was cut to the heart and repeatedly sent her cavalry commanders and bodyguards to Florus to beg him to stop the slaughter. He, caring nothing for the number of victims of the high rank of the petitioner, but only for the profit he made out of the loot, was deaf to her appeals, and the mad fury of the soldiers did not even spare the queen. Not only did they torture their prisoners to death before her eyes, they would actually have killed her if she had not escaped in time into the royal palace and spent the night there with her guards in fear that the soldiers would attack. She was staying in Jerusalem to perform a vow to God. It is usual for those who are sick or in distress to vow that for 30 days before they intend to sacrifice, they will abstain from wine and shave their heads. These vows Bernice was then performing, and she stood barefoot before the judgment seat appealing to Florus, but no respect was paid to her, and she went in danger of her life. Okay, that's interesting. sacrifice, they will abstain from wine and shave their heads. Yeah, I think I read that somewhere in the Old Testament. Which, she might look a little bit like perhaps a Bene Gesserit in the David Lynch Dune with the bald-headed aesthetic. But anyway, these events occurred on the 16th of Artemisios. The next day, the 16th of... what is Artemisios? Is that Aries? Is that April? Is that the 16th of April? So, interesting that they didn't change this translation. Let's take a look at Artemisios here. I want to take a quick look because I have never heard that before. The ancient Macedonian calendar is a lunisolar calendar that was in use in ancient Macedon in the first millennium BCE. It's consisted of 12 synodic lunar months, so a 12-month system. Hey, how's it going, Artemis? So it's a 12-month lunar system. Weird that it's a 12-month lunar system. Very weird. By the time the calendar was being used across the Hellenic world, 7 total embodiments were being added in each 19-year Metonic cycle. Okay. But I still want to know. So, all right. So I want to assume that it must be named after Artemis. Let me see what Ancestry.com says. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So derived from Artemis. The name Artemisios is derived from Greek, specifically linked to the name of the goddess Artemis, who is renowned in mythology as the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and childbirth. The name signifies qualities associated with Artemis, such as strength, independence, and a connection to nature as a male counterpart to... hold on a second. Strength of nature is a male counterpart to the name Artemis. It embodies the traits of the admired in Greek culture, such as valor and protector spirit, making it a notable choice in various contexts. Yeah, I see. Okay, historically, the name Artemisios has its roots in ancient Greece, where the worship of deities was central to societal structure, religious practices. Artemis herself was celebrated in various cults. Okay, in contemporary Artemisios remains a relatively uncommon name, but is appreciated for its rich heritage. Okay, so Artemisios, I guess, is the male version of Artemis. This is hunter. So this is either like Sagittarian times, which I think would be like, what, December? December or November or something like that would be the Sagittarian times, or it's the Aryan times. It could be an Aryan time kind of thing, too, the way it vibes. Okay, let's get back to the read. The next day, the crowd, in great distress, swarmed into the upper marketplace, shrieking and lamenting for the dead, and still more vociferously calling down curses on Florus. This alarmed the influential citizens and chief priests, who rent their clothes and, falling down before one man after another, begged them to desist and not, after all they had suffered, provoke Florus to commit some irreparable outrage. Right? It's just like, this is the problem with people when people don't care about their own people, just want to exploit them, and need to dictate the way that they live to make sure they can extract what they want to exploit from them. We've been living this way for centuries. Centuries. The crowd at once complied out of respect for the petitioners and in the hope that Florus would commit no more crimes against them. The extinction of the disturbance annoyed the procurator, who, in order to rekindle the flames, summoned the chief priests and prominent citizens and said that the only way of proving that the people would not revolt again was to go out and meet the troops approaching from Caesarea. 2 cohorts were on the way while the people were still being collected. He sent orders to the centurions of the cohorts to instruct their men not to return the Jews' salutes, and if they uttered a word against him, to use their weapons. The chief priests assembled great numbers in the temple and urged them to meet the Romans and to avert irreparable disaster by welcoming the cohorts. This appeal failed to influence the insurgent element, and the thought of the fallen swung the majority to the side of the bolder spirits. Thereupon, every priest and every minister of God brought out the sacred vessel and put on the robes they always wore when officiating. The harpers and singers appeared with their instruments, and they all fell down and implored the people to preserve their sacred ornaments and not provoke the Romans to plunder the treasures of God. The chief priests themselves could be seen heaping dust on their heads, their clothes rent and their breasts bared. They appealed by name to each of the prominent citizens and collectively to the crowd, not by some trifling offense to betray their country to men who were anxious to sack it. What advantage would it be to the soldiers to be saluted by the Jews? What compensation for past wrongs not to go out now? If they gave them the usual welcome, Florus would be deprived of all pretext for war, and they themselves would enjoy their country and immunity from further wrong. Again, to give way to the handful of insurgents, when with their overwhelming numbers they could compel even them to behave sensibly, would be feeble in the extreme. Okay, so that's been about 5 pages, so we're going to take a break here. Let me check real quick. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. It's been 5 pages. Good. All right. And so, our next selection is from Fragments of Unbecoming. This is like a new album. And I listened to a little bit of it, and I really dug it. So this is Dawnbringer. Be prepared. This is some more brutal shit. right, we're good. We're done. That was that. Excellent. All right, so more ridiculously heavy shit, as I am known to do. So, welcome back, everybody, as we are continuing to chug on through Chapter 8 here of The Jewish War. With these arguments, they quieted the crowd. That's the way it ought to be. Quieted the crowd while the insurgents yielded, some to threats, others to authority. Then, leading the way, they went quietly and in good order to meet the column, and when the soldiers came near, saluted them, but when they met with no response, they began to vilify Florus. This was the agreed signal to attack them. In a flash, the soldiers had surrounded and begun to club them. When they fled, the cavalry pursued them and trampled them down. Many fell under the blows of the Romans, and more were crushed by their friends. Round the gates there was frightful congestion as everyone raced to get in first. The flight was slowed down for them all, and those who stumbled met a horrible end. Suffocated and crushed to pulp beneath countless feet, they were unrecognizable when their kinsfolk came to bury them. The soldiers poured in, with the fugitives raining blows on any they caught, and drove the crowd through Bezetha. What is Bezetha? The area inside the new north wall. Okay. In an effort to force their way through and seize the temple and Antonia. For the same purpose, Florus led his own men out of the royal palace and endeavored to reach the fortress. But the attempt failed, for the people swung round to face him and blocked his advance, then lined up on the roofs and pelted the Romans. Suffering severely from the falling missiles and too weak to hack a way through the crowds that blocked the narrow streets, they retreated to their camp near the palace. So it's very interesting seeing, this is organized gang violence, right? These are like ordinary citizens that are just up for, like, whenever their guys are ready to have them come out and go kind of thing, right? This is like this could be like early, terrorist recruitment culture, if you will. The insurgents, afraid that Florus would come on again and seize the temple by way of Antonia, climbed up at once and cut a gap in the colonnades and linked Antonia with the temple. This cooled the avarice of Florus, for it was the treasure of God he was after, and for this reason he was anxious to get into Antonia, so that when the colonnades were broken down, he was diverted from his attempt. He sent for the chief priests and the Sanhedrin and told them that he was going to quit the city, but would leave them as big a garrison as they wanted. In reply, they solemnly promised to maintain order and prevent any rising. If he left them one cohort, but not the one that had been engaged, as the people hated it because of what it had done to them, so he changed the cohort as requested, and with the rest of his forces went back to Caesarea. As further inducement to hostilities, he sent Cestius a false report of a Jewish revolt, alleging that they had started the recent fighting and charging them with violence of which they had in reality been the victims. The Jerusalem magistrate did not take this lying down. They and Bernice, too, wrote more than one letter to Cestius about the crimes which Florus had committed against the city. Cestius read the communications from both parties and consulted his staff. They advised him to go at once to Jerusalem at the head of an army and either punish the revolt, if real, or strengthen the allegiance of the Jews if they were indeed loyal. But he thought it better to send one of his colleagues first to examine the position and to bring a reliable report of the state of Jewish feeling. So he sent the tribune Neopolitanus, who at Jamnia met King Agrippa on his way home from Alexandria and told him who had sent him and why. There too, the Jews, chief priests with influential citizens, and the Sanhedrin arrived to welcome the king. After paying homage, they began to bewail their own calamities and to describe the savagery of Florus. This shocked Agrippa, but he discreetly turned his indignation on the Jews. He inwardly pitied, wishing to humble their pride, and by refusing to see that they had suffered any wrong to damp their ardor for revenge. They, being men of parts and property owners with a personal interest in peace, realized that the king's rebuke was kindly meant. But the people came 7 miles out of Jerusalem to welcome Agrippa and Neopolitanus, with the widows of the slain running in front and wailing, and the people replying to their groans with lamentations. They implored Agrippa to help them and dinned into the ears of Neopolitanus all that Florus had done to them. When they entered the city, the Jews pointed to the desolate marketplace and sacked houses. Then, with Agrippa's help, they persuaded Neopolitanus with one attendant to walk round the city as far as Siloam and see for himself that the Jews were submissive to all other Romans and only bitter against Florus because of his appalling savagery. Going through the city, Neopolitanus found proof enough of their docility. So he went up into the temple. There he assembled the people, praised them highly for their disloyalty to Rome. For their loyalty to Rome, and urged them strongly to keep the peace. Then from the outer court he made obeisance to the sanctuary of God, after which he returned to Cestius. The Jewish crowd now turned to the king and the chief priests, begging them to send envoys to Nero to denounce Florus, and by protesting against his wholesale massacre to end suspicions of a Jewish revolt. For they would be thought to have started hostilities if they were not quick to point out the real aggressor. It was evident that they would not take it quietly if anyone tried to block the embassy. Agrippa realized that to choose men to accuse Florus would be to ask for trouble, but that to stand by till Jewish fury flared up into actual hostilities was dangerous even for himself. So he summoned the crowd into the gymnasium and placed his sister Bernice conspicuously on the roof of the Hasmonean palace. This was above the gymnasium on the other side of the upper city. The gymnasium was linked with the temple by a bridge. Then he began. Interesting. And gymnasiums were part of athletic mystery schools back in the day. And I would even imagine that any gymnasium as a part of the Jewish world would have been a deal between pro-Roman Jews to have such things there, as long as they weren't right in the city, I would suppose, where they're too close to their temple to kind of make desecration, if you will. And I want to know what the Hasmonean Palace is, real quick. 'Cause that's an interesting name to me, and I would like to know more about that word. Hasmonean and Herodian royal winter palaces, or the Hasmonean and Herodian Palace at Jericho, are a complex of Hasmonean and Herodian buildings from the Second Temple period, which were discovered in the western plain of Jericho Valley at Tulul Abu El Eliak, near the place or the Roman road connecting Jericho with Jerusalem enters Wadi Quelt. That's from the top of DuckDuckGo Wikipedia entry. Okay, I see. All right, cool. So, if the other one's Herodian, then Hasmone must have been named after someone, like a Hasmodeus or something. Something like that. Anyway. If I had found you all eager for the war with the Romans, whereas in fact the most honest and sincere section of the people are bent on keeping the peace, I should not have come forward to address you or ventured to give advice, for it is a waste of breath to say anything in favor of a wise course when the audience is unanimously in favor of a foolish one. But some of you are young men with no experience of the horrors of war. Others are too sanguine about the prospects of independence. Others are led on by selfish ambition and profit to be made out of weaker men if the explosion occurs. So, in the hope that these men may learn sense and change their ways, and that the folly of a few may not be visited on good citizens, I felt obliged to call you all together and tell you what I think is best. Please do not interrupt me if you disapprove of what I say, for those who have absolutely made up their mind to revolt will be free to feel the same after hearing my views. But my words will be lost even on those who want to listen unless everyone keeps quiet. Now, I am aware that many orate against the insolence of the procurators and rhapsodize about the wonders of liberty. But before I go into the question of who you are and whom you are planning to fight, I must first sort out your jumble of pretexts. If you are trying to avenge your wrongs, why do you prate about liberty? If, on the other hand, slavery seems unbearable, as it is a waste of time to blame your rulers. If they were the mildest of men, it would still be disgraceful to be slaves. Consider these pretexts. Where does that sound familiar? Do you want to be a laboring dependent on the state, or do you want to see to your own labors right? But anyway, consider the pretext one at a time, and see how feeble are your grounds for war. First, the charges against the procurators. You should flatter, not provoke the authorities. When, for trifling errors you pile on reproaches, it is yourself you hurt by your denunciation of the offenders. Instead of injuring you secretly and shamefacedly, they plunder you openly. Nothing damps an aggressor like patient submission, and the meekness of the prosecuted puts the persecutor to shame. I grant that the ministers of Rome are unbearably harsh. Does it follow that all the Romans are persecuting you, including Caesar? Yet it is on them that you are going to make war. It is not by their wish that there is an unscrupulous governor come from Rome, nor can Western eyes see the going on in the East. It is not easy in Rome even to get up-to-date news of what happens here. It would be absurd, because of the trifling misdemeanors of one man, to go to war with a whole nation. And such a nation that does not even know what it is all about. A nation that does not even know what it's all about. Right? he's trying to, like, tell these people, like, guys, you are fighting in a small world here. Like this is your fishbowl you're fighting in, right? Because, like, Rome is looking at this and being like, geez, with you fucking people. And then Rome is making this public because it's part of just Roman society as it is. So everybody in Rome knows what the hell's going on, I mean, they have a hard time knowing what's going on. But eventually, this gets to them. I mean, at the very least, Josephus happens, right? Because here it is in this book. Man, so yeah, and then the whole world makes decisions based off of this, right? And most other nations didn't model themselves this way. But unfortunately, this manner of governance eventually kind of came in. And we're doing this here with people's behavior that has not changed regardless of their belief system, as we're looking at all of these material atheists that are practically nihilists and what they are putting all of their idealisms into, which I suppose are not nihilists if they have ideals. But there will be nihilists that kind of exploit, like nihilists are going to exploit stuff because they're hypocrites, and so they're going to leech off of other person's purposes as according to their own, need to entertain their existence that they insist on persisting even though they believe in nothing. Our grievances can be quickly put right. The same procurator will not be here forever, and his successors are almost sure to be more reasonable. But once set on foot, war cannot easily be either broken off or fought to a conclusion without disaster. As for your new passion for liberty, it comes too late. You ought to have made a supreme effort to retain it long ago. For the experience of slavery is a painful one, and to escape it altogether, any effort is justified, but the man who has once submitted and then revolts is a refractory slave, not a lover of liberty. Thus the time when he ought to have done everything possible to keep the Romans out was when the country was invaded by Pompey. But our ancestors and their kings, with material, physical, and mental resources far superior to yours, faced a mere fraction of the Roman army and put up no resistance. Will you, who have learnt submission from your fathers and are so ill provided compared with those who first submitted, stand up to the whole Roman Empire? Think of the Athenians. To preserve the liberty of Greece, they once consigned their city to the flames. When proud Xerxes sailed across land and marched across water, Xerxes cut a canal through the isthmus of Mount Athos and crossed the Dardanelles by a bridge of boats. And counting the seas no barrier, led an army too big for Europe to hold. They chased him away in a single ship, like a runaway slave. Near little Salami, they broke the might of Asia, and today they are slaves of Rome. And the city that once lorded it over Greece takes her orders from Italy. Think of the Spartans after Thermopylae and Plataea, after Agesilaus, who swept across Asia. They are happy under the same masters. Think of the Macedonians. they still dream of Philip and see visions of the goddess who, with Alexander, sowed for them the seeds of world empire. Yet they endure for complete transformation and loyally serve the new recipients of fortune's favor. So interesting here that Josephus is talking about how, oh, this guy, he sees the goddess. It's I guess he's probably writing by Roman, like if this book is written for a Roman capacity, then I can see why he'd write like that. But if this was in any way of a personal capacity that then was just put through the Roman officialdom or whatever, as in acceptable in his words of his faith, right? So is Josephus a pagan Jew, right? Like, does he worship the pagan gods? I'd imagine that he must worship Yahweh as well. I mean, like, because it's paganism. It's, it's like back then, it's like, it's one thing that, you got a god. It's another thing as to whether the life structure is dependent on the relationship with that god. Josephus is of Roman life structure, not Palestinian life structure. So perhaps that would mean so, right? I don't know. I didn't look into it. I'm more interested in the history that Josephus knows, to look into that later, than the particular details of Josephus, which will get picked up as relevant as we go. So that's just to throw the awareness of the question. Other nations by the thousand, bursting with greater determination to assert their liberty, no longer resist. Will you alone refuse to serve the masters of the whole world? Where are the men? Where are the weapons you count on? Where is the fleet that is that is to sweep the Roman seas? Where are the funds to pay for your expeditions? Do you think you were going to war with Egyptians and Arabs? He's putting them in their place. It's just like, dude, you've got crazy ambitions, and you don't do very well without Rome at all. Right? This is like the Ukraine begging Europe and America for money. Tracksuit cocksucking tour, right? Do you think you're going to war with Egypt and the Arabs? Look at the far-flung empire of Rome and contrast your own impotence. Why our forces have been worsted even by our neighbors again and again, while their arms have triumphed over the whole world, and even the world is not big enough to satisfy them. Euphrates is not far enough to the east, or Danube to the north, or Libya and the desert beyond to the south, or Cadiz to the west. But beyond the ocean they have sought a new world, carrying their arms as far as Britain, that land of mystery. Why not face facts? Are you richer than the Gauls, stronger than the Germans, cleverer than the Greeks, more numerous than all the nations of the world? What gives you confidence to defy the power of Rome? Right? Because they never took, they could never just take Rome. They had to, this is what they did. They integrated into Rome and made Rome more like them, but yet still they did not, in this context, by the rules, by the way the world was set up in the age of Aries, right? So one could possibly say that this only worked because of the consciousness shift in the age of Pisces. But beyond the ocean, they sought a new world. Hold on a second. I'm sorry, I went too far ahead. Far to the east, Danube to the north, Libya does Cadiz to the west, but beyond the ocean's world. Why not face facts? Are you richer than the Gauls? Yeah, I'm sorry. Right down here. Duh. It is terrible to be enslaved. It will be said, how much worse for Greeks, who surpass every nation under the sun in nobility and fill such a wide domain, and yet bow before the fasces of a Roman governor. Fascism. Rome is fascist. Understand? Rome is fascist. You can be fascist and not racist. Rome wasn't in the least bit racist. It wasn't like the way things were. It wasn't the race that was the defining thing about foreigners and Romans. And usually, Romans were, like before Christianization, there was no appropriation of your culture other than Rome letting it into their culture as a way to elevate that culture, right? If you're Persian and your Persian place is now part of Rome, like Persian things, Persian gods and things like that would be in the mix of Rome and be sourced as such to Persia, not in an occulted way to be a cultural appropriation and steal the credit for those things. Okay, so governors Macedonia went 500 cities, and they do not. Okay. As do the Macedonians, who have a better right than you to demand their liberty. And what of the 500 cities of Asia? Do they not, without a garrison, bow before one governor and consulars fasci? Need I mention the Henioshi? That sounds almost Japanese. The Colchians and the Tauric race, the peoples near the Bosporus, the Black Sea, and the Sea of Azov. Azov, battalion, Black Sea. Now we're talking about the Eastern Empire. At one time, they recognized not even a native ruler, and now they submit to 3,000 legionaries. While 40 warships keep the peace on the sea where before none but pirates sailed. How justly Bithynia, Cappadocia, Pamphylia, Lycia, Cilicia might demand liberty, yet without armed pressure they pay their dues. Then there are the Thracians, spread over a country 5 days, march in width and 7 in length, more rugged and more defensible than yours. A country whose icy blasts are enough to halt an invader. Right? Like, Rome is just laying down, natural law on the national level. Right? Natural law. It's just like, you don't have what it takes as a nation to hold your own sovereignty, even if Rome wasn't in your way. Right? That's, it's a great argument. It's a damn good argument. It's just like, here we are, Rome, like, let's just paint a picture. If Rome just wasn't here, you're going against the Arabs? You're going against the Egyptians? Good fucking luck with your fucking numbers. Anyway. And this is from what I understand, Rome is not being that exploitive either, right? So it's not like Rome is trying to make things deliberately worse for them, other than what is ever inherently wrong with Rome's connection in general, through the general shadow corruptions, various misplaced agendas, so on and so forth, but otherwise at face value governs things properly as the idea. So, yet 2,000 Roman guards suffice to maintain order. Their neighbors, the Illyrians, whose lands extend from Dalmatia to the Danube frontier, need only 2 legions to keep them quiet. In fact, Illyrians unite with Romans to halt Dacian raids. The Dalmatians, again, who have so often tried to shake off the yoke and have always been driven by defeat to rally their forces and revolt again, now live peaceably under one Roman legion. So, yeah. So, you can make all sorts of arguments about the empire. You can make all sorts of arguments about the state. You can make all sorts of arguments about America. You're just a bitch complaining, right? And it's just like, we're the top dogs right now. We've got the it factor. Your way of life is so antithetical that you wouldn't know how to grow within our system. And look at these people that aren't like you, and they can grow in our system. Like, there's all sorts of places that I could probably go with that argument, just thinking about here in life, right? It's just like, look how simple it is to fix a certain number of problems for your fucking self without having to overthrow America, right? I didn't have to overthrow anything to make a certain amount of gains, and certainly it is my own fault that I didn't get any of other certain kinds of gains. But the gains that I do have, I've earned. And they're personally significant to me. And I'm not worried what happens to the fucking temple down the street. But if any people might reasonably be tempted to rebel by its peculiar advantages, the people in the Gauls, provided as they are with such marvelous natural defenses on the east, the Alps, on the north, the Rhine, on the south, the Pyrenees, on the west, the ocean, yet in spite of these immense obstacles, in spite of the huge total of 305 nations, in spite of the prosperity that wells up from their soil and enables them to flood the whole world with their goods, they submit to being the milch cow of Rome and receiving from her hands what they themselves have produced. And this they tolerate, not from effeminacy or racial inferiority. They fought for 80 years to save their liberty. But because they are overawed by the might of Rome, and still more by her destiny, which wins her more victories than do her arms, so Gaul is kept in order by 1,200 soldiers, hardly more men than she has cities. Right, so ultra light touch. The Gauls are good with their Romanized. Like, this is where French comes from, right? Because these are Germans that are learning Latin. And the Latinized German is what becomes the French language. Then Spain, in the fight for independence, the gold from her soil could not save her, nor could the vast stretch of land and sea that separates her from Rome. It's more like Germanized Latin, not Latinized German. Nor the tribes of Lusitania and Cantabria, with their passion for fighting, nor the neighboring ocean that terrifies even the natives with its tides, crossing the cloud-capped Pyrenees and advancing their arms beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The Romans enslaved Spain too, yet to guard this remote and almost invincible nation requires but one legion. Which of you has not heard of the Germans with their inexhaustible manpower? Okay, so at this time, the Germans were well known by the Jews. Isn't this interesting? Isn't this interesting? You have, I am sure, seen the magnificent physique on many occasions, for on every side Roman masters have German slaves. Yet this people occupies an immense area. Did you hear that? Did you fucking hear that? German slaves. Fuck you, I rest my case. Anyway, yet this people occupies an immense area. Their physique is surpassed by their pride. From the bottom of their hearts, they despise death. And when enraged, they are more dangerous than the fiercest of wild beasts. That's, that's probably, if these guys are converted Romans, like Germans that are like, they're slaves, but they're like they're like top tier slaves that want to fight and shit and want to be trusted. Like you might have some Ulfidnar, some berserkers in there. Yet the Rhine is the limit of their aggression, and the Romans will, with 8 legions, have tamed them, enslaving their prisoners and driving the entire nation to seek refuge in flight. Consider the defenses of the Britons. You, who feel so sure of the defenses of Jerusalem, they are surrounded by the ocean and inhabit an island as big as this continent. Yet the Romans cross the sea and enslave them, and 4 legions keep that huge island quiet. But why should I say more about that when even the Parthians, the most warlike race of all, rulers of so many nations and protected by such vast forces, send hostages to Rome and on Italian soil may be seen humbly submitting for the sake of peace aristocrats of the East? Almost. Did I skip? I did skip. All right. Let me give myself another break. I totally skipped the last break. I really got into I've been so into what this guy's been talking about that I just forgot to shut up and give myself a break. Okay, here we go. This is okay, this one's a little bit wild. I think these guys are German. This song is called The Blue Hill, but it's got its title Zliskanes, Zeliskanes, which means the Blue Hill. So that's like a translation of it. This band is called Sky Forger. This is also like a new album. All right, so that's Skyforger. So there's some new shit for you. Excellent. Thanks for sticking around for the break. Now, here we got about 2.5 pages left. Almost every nation under the sun bows down before the might of Rome, and will you alone go to war, not even considering the fate of the Carthaginians, who boasted of great Hannibal and their glorious Phoenician ancestors, but fell beneath Scipio's hand. The Cyrenians, Spartans by descent, the Marmaridae, a race that extends to the waterless desert. Sirts, whose very mention terrifies. Nasamonians, Moors, Numidians, with their vast numbers. None of them could resist Roman skill at arms. This third of the whole world, whose nations could hardly be counted, bounded by the Atlantic and the Pillars of Hercules, and supporting the millions of Ethiopia as far as the Indian Ocean, is subdued in its entirety and apart from regular crops, which for 8 months of the year feed the whole population of Rome. These people pay tribute of every kind, and for the needs of the empire willingly submit to taxation, and unlike you, they take no offense when given orders, though only a single legion is quartered in their midst. But why should we go so far for evidence of the Roman power when we can find it in Egypt, our nearest neighbor? She stretches as far as Ethiopia and Arabia Felix. She is the port for India. She has a population of 7.5 million, including the citizens of Alexandria, as is shown by the poll tax returns. But she does not repudiate the rule of Rome. Yet, what a stimulus to revolt she has in Alexandria, with its size, its population, its wealth, a city 3.5 miles long and over a mile wide, which pays Rome every month for more tribute than you pay in a year, and apart from money, sends her corn for 4 months, and which is protected on every side by trackless deserts, of harborless seas, of rivers, of marshes. Yet none of these things proved equal to the fortune of Rome, and 2 legions stationed in the city curb the remotest parts of Egypt, and the nobility of Macedon as well. Whom, I ask you, will you find in the uninhabited wilds to be your allies in this war? For in the inhabited world all are Romans, unless you extend your hopes beyond the Euphrates and imagine that your kinsmen, even beyond the Tigris, will come to your aid. But they will not, without good reason, get involved in a full-scale war. Right? It's just like, that's my point. It's just like, I'm not interested in dying for the weird guy in the tracksuit in the Ukraine, right? I'm not interested in being invested in me and my nation killing anybody for him. I got nothing to do with it. And if they should decide on anything so foolish, the Parthian king would put a stop to it, for he is anxious to preserve his armistice with the Romans, and will consider it a breach of the truce if any of his tributaries take the field against them. So there is no refuge left except to make God your ally, but he too is ranged on the Roman side. For without his help, so vast an empire could never have been built up. Think, too, how difficult it would be, even if you were fighting feeble opponents, to preserve the purity of your religion, and how you will be forced to transgress the very laws which furnish your chief hope of making God your ally, and so will alienate him. He's just giving them the spiritual no-win. It's like you would have to violate way too many sins to do what it takes to amass the strength to have a war with Rome. If you observe the custom of the Sabbath with its complete cessation of activity, you will promptly be crushed, as were your ancestors by Pompey, who was almost active in pressing the siege on the days when the besieged were passive. Right? So it's like the whole world is just like, there's no special day that you don't work. There's no special day that you stop everything for God. Like, not like on that level. Right? Like, pagans are just like, if our greater celebrations must be sacrificed to deal with the enemy, it's what we must do. Right? And I have to learn more about what Roman occupation of Europe was particularly like during the pagan period. But anyway, pressing the siege of the days. Okay, if you observe the custom of the Sabbath, right? Hold on a second. So I read that. See, but if in the war you transgress your ancestral law, I don't see what you have left to fight for, since your one desire is that none of your ancestral customs should be broken. Right? He's just telling him, like, this is how you tell everybody the way that you are. To win this war, you can't even be in the tradition you're fighting for. You would have to know yourselves by different customs and traditions. You'd have to completely, like, change what you say your God decrees you to do. Right? He's basically telling. So listen, do you want to tell your people that you're kind of running a fucking religious scam on your buddies and telling them that God's going to do horrible things to them because you're out of step? Right? You know, it's just like, at a certain point, the elites have just got to be looking at each other. It's just like, okay, listen, man, we all know how this actually works, right? You know, but this is politics. This is the narrative for the masses, regardless of what these leaders may actually think that they know, right? From leader to leader, he's just making the practicality, like, he's indifferent to the ontological shock of them not being able to keep up with God, right? So anyway, everyone who engages in war relies on either divine or human help, but when, as is probable, both are denied, the aggressor is bringing certain destruction on himself. What prevents you from killing your wives and children with your own hands and from consigning your ancestral home, the most beautiful in the world, to the flames? By such madness you will at least avoid the shame of defeat. It is wise, my friends, it is wise, while the vessel is still in harbor, to foresee the approaching storm and not to sail out into the middle of the hurricane to sure destruction. There's invocation of maritime law. That's the Phoenician, the Sea People Federation influence on the time. For those on whom disaster falls out of the blue are at least entitled to pity, but a man who plunges into destruction with his eyes open earns only contempt. Possibly some of you suppose that you are making war in accordance with agreed rules, and that when the Romans have won, they will be kind to you, and will not think of making you an example of other nations by burning down your holy city and destroying your entire race. I tell you, not even if you survive will you find a place of refuge, since every people recognizes the lordship of Rome, or fears that it will have to do so. Again, the danger threatens not only ourselves here, but also those who live in other cities. For there is not a region in the world without its Jewish colony. All these, if you go to war, will be massacred by your opponents, and through the folly of a few men, every city will run with Jewish blood. Okay, so now he's also telling them that if you get to this full-scale war thing, the whole tribe you're trying to get back together is going to get fucked, and you're not going to be able to do a goddamn thing for them. Just because we will know we'll have to kill them, as once they get word, they're going to rally and do their thing. Right? So, he's letting him know, hey, buddy, we're on to how Jewish uprisings work. We understand your sleeper cells. There could be an excuse for such a massacre. But if it did not take place, think how wicked it would be to take up arms against such kindly people. Pity your wives and children, or at least pity your mother city and its sacred precincts. Spare the temple and preserve your use, the sanctuary with its sacred treasures. For the Romans will no longer keep their hands off when they have captured these. Since sparing them hitherto, they have received no thanks at all. I call to witness all you hold sacred, the holy angels of God, the fatherland, we all share, that I have not kept back anything that is for your safety. If you make a right decision, you will share with me the blessings of peace, but if you are carried away by your passions, you will go without me to your doom. At the end of his speech, he burst into tears, as did his sister, and with his tears considerably damped the ardor of his hearers, but they shouted that it was not Rome they were fighting, it was Florus, the man who had done them such wrong. To this King Agrippa replied, but you have acted as if you were already at war with Rome. You have paid no tribute to Caesar. You have cut down the colonnades leading to Antonia. You can refute the charges of insurrection by joining up the colonnades again and paying the tax. For you know Florus doesn't own the fortress, and Florus will not receive your money. See? That like this is interesting, right? This is like saying like for instance, let's be for real here. The Air Force One deal that just happened was the president is presiding over what is officially a deal for the United States Air Force as an entity, for the United States of America as an entity. And then it gets approved through the proper channels. And the only reason why this is being complained about is because the Trump Foundation is an international thing that has business in Qatar. Business, and it's just like, okay, so he's got business in Qatar. What of it? I've got the metaphysical people like Amanda DeMarco, Indigo Angel, shout out. She thinks that this is part of a new deal that the Trump administration has with the dark Syrians and Draconians. All right? But that's a metaphysical claim that only other intuitives on that level can personally verify, and then they have to take that and then they have to draw the context to that to make sure that you're not getting a cross signal, right? You're going to need reinforcement because it's no good to anybody if you're the only one that understands that and can convey and explain that, right? So you have to go through a whole lot to make that point, especially because, well, nobody's ever fucking seen a Draco reptilian or a Syrian as such, as far as in a public capacity with a clear understanding of what you were dealing with. So we need something that is more substantive to talk about, because then otherwise you're just complaining about laws that you don't really care to change. You know, you just want there to be corruption, right? It's corruption this, it's corruption that, but corruption is just used as a rhetoric word for these people. It's shallow rhetoric when they say corruption. It just keeps you playing with the infinite frustration of corruption that is real, but you're being gaslit like it's not real. Like it's just some silly thing, but we're not going to deny it, but we're also going to say that it doesn't actually hold weight in what. It's fucking stupid. It's fucking stupid, and it robs you blind. Accepting this advice, the people with the king and Bernice went up into the temple and began to rebuild the colonnades, while the magistrates and counselors went to the various villages and collected the tribute, quickly getting together the 40 talents due. In this way, Agrippa delayed for the moment the threatened war. But when he tried further to persuade the mob to obey Florus until Caesar sent a successor to replace him, they were furious and abused the king and announced his banishment from the city. Some of the insurgents even dared to throw stones at him. Like, these people, this is probably the product. If you're talking about like a whole lot of slaves and this is how you treat your slaves, like your urban slaves, well, fuck, man. They probably don't have a very good vocabulary. Naturally, they're going to result to violence. These people probably don't have the best vocabulary. They're probably, because, they're doing the Hebrew thing. They've got like 8,000 words to play with or something. So the king saw that the passions of the revolutionaries could no longer be controlled, and wounded by the insults he had received, he sent their magistrates and influential citizens to Florus at Caesarea, in order that he might choose some of them to collect the tribute from the countryside. Then he retired to his own kingdom. And then that's it. And then next time there will be an outbreak of war in Chapter 9. And we'll find out what that's all about. So thanks, Artemis, or Artemis, Artem 1C, Artem 1C, or whatever your name is, for being here. Excellent, guys. So if you're not catching this on the live streams and stuff, lives have been, the chat's not been too active or whatever. Not the most exciting thing what I'm doing here, right? I don't usually do just a crazy exciting show. I am making resource on the internet, though, right? I am a resource. I am a flavor, a filter, and an interpretation of a book that you can catch being completely read, right? You can discriminate between my conjecture, my opinions and such, and what is being read, and is such the value of what this is as kind of a book study group. So I appreciate you all, and it's a-okay that you don't have to be in the chat or anything like that. Granted, a hello at the very least is always kind of you. You bother to show up and catch it. But without overwhelming me with something that requires ridiculous levels of pre-stream work, any ideas for how I do my streams? You can throw me a handful of simple things, because I've got overwhelming things in the real world that are always more important. But this is something that we should all use social media for, is just to get that peek at each other. All right, man. I will catch you guys another time.